Awesome. We're about to get started. I figure what I'll do is I'll do a quick intro of myself and then talk about the two guests. The goal of this session is to talk about pricing, packaging, AI, kind of a lot of the disruption that we're seeing in pricing and packaging that's happening right now. And I'm Scott, CEO and co-founder of Metronome. This is our office. Thank you all for being here. Metronome builds billing systems and data infrastructure for building and properly pricing your usage-based businesses. So we work with a lot of really great customers, large companies like Databricks and OpenAI, all the way to very small companies that are growing really fast. And I'm super excited to welcome Madhavan and Josh. So maybe Josh, do you want to introduce yourself and talk about who you are?
Hi folks, Josh Bloom here. I spent 20 years working on pricing at Simon Kucher & Partners. I joined the firm when it was quite small. I was employee number 10 in the US and helped build the tech practice from scratch. So along with Madhavan, we started working with software and internet companies probably about 15 years ago and built a business that's over $100 million now, over 500 people. And we just left this summer, which Madhavan will get into as well. And I wish we could share more about what we're doing next, but we're in stealth mode at the moment. So building on that legacy, we won't be leaving the world of pricing.
Thank you. I'm Madhavan. I used to do pricing at Simon Kucher too. I was a partner there for over 17 years with Josh, and my area of focus has always been pricing for tech companies. I ended up writing a book called Monetizing Innovation. Worked with over 250 companies, and Josh too. I think between us, we probably worked with over 500 companies, 50 plus unicorns, quarter of the Cloud 100 on their monetization strategy and scaling strategy. So we'll try to share some nuggets based on our pattern recognition. Yeah, and we are now off to our, next gig, but soon to come. So.
Awesome. Okay, since you've worked with companies as like really small all the way to large public companies, I guess I would love to hear, how do you think about the importance of pricing? Like, when should a company start to think about pricing, and when should they come talk to a consultant like you?
Yeah, so I think maybe I'll start with that. So that, when we back in the day, like if I take like 10, 15 years ago, I used to always get a call. It's like, okay, we need pricing help. I'm saying, sure, when do you need it? We needed it yesterday. Like, great, how long did you work on this product? 3 years. I was like, like you worked on the product for 3 years and you had no clue whether you would actually make money on this product. Like, there's just a complete sort of, it used to be a pattern. That's why I wrote Monetizing Innovation. In Monetizing Innovation, we talk about price before product. Price comes before product in the English dictionary. It stops right there for most folks. But what does price before product mean? We actually talked about how to design products around what customers need, what they value, and what they're willing to pay for. In short, around the price. Because when we, in general, when you talk price, most people think about a dollar figure. That's just a price point. When we think about price, or when I think about price, it's a measure. Like, liter is a measure of volume, price is a measure of value. And when you think of it that way, price literally stands for, do people want your product and how badly do they need it? And if you don't think about pricing from the get-go, you're just building something hoping to make money at the end. The successful companies are the ones who actually do incorporate pricing much, much earlier in their product design, so that they understand that customers need their product, value it, and most importantly, will actually pay for it, and prioritize their R&D roadmap based on willingness to pay to actually hit profitable growth. That's what successful companies do, right? I mean, it's if you just build a product, slap on a price, and throw it in the market, you're just kind of hoping for the best. So thinking about pricing from the get-go is really critical. We said that in Monetizing Innovation, there were two types of, let's say, companies that we used to see. The ones that were the early adopters, they actually adopted the principles and they really were successful. And then there were some laggards, and they're like, oh, we still need to think about product. We are obsessing over the product, etc. Guess what? Now, because of AI, even that group has to think about pricing way earlier because of the cost structure of AI. Even in the seed stage, pricing has become super critical. So I think thinking about pricing much early as early as you can, and understanding what price means has become even more critical now.
As we've spent a lot of time over the past few months talking with earlier stage companies, I think that is the main difference, is this wave of technology adoption with AI fundamentally has changed the paradigm, that it used to be you could build a product, you could get to Series B, C even, without a really solid monetization strategy. But that has been essentially flipped on its head. You need a monetization strategy from the very beginning, from seed stage. Fundamentally, it has to do with a combination of the fact that there are cost pressures. Your own costs are based on consumption of infrastructure services that require significant investment, and you need to show that you can make a return on that capital investment. In addition, there's just a real focus on exploring the boundaries of what's possible through usage-based pricing and outcome-based pricing, which I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about. But people don't go in with the starting assumption that you're going to skate by with user-based pricing.
Cool. Okay, actually, I would love to. Maybe what I'm hearing is the more modern, like AI-based startups, they're forced to confront pricing a lot earlier. I think the meme of startups maybe 10 years ago, it's like, it's just a bunch of engineers, and then eventually you hire some business people, et cetera.
Yeah.
So how do you actually, like, maybe starting at the team composition level, what do you think that change means for this next crop of people? Do you think it's just like, we should be hiring a certain type of person earlier? Or is it more that we should be pushing the founders to be more focused on pricing and packaging early in the product development process?
Yeah, I think it's more of the latter. I mean, if you're a startup, it doesn't mean you go rushing and try to get someone fully dedicated to pricing. It's really starting with the founder. First of all, building a culture of profitable growth. That is super key, right? I mean, it starts from the top. So as a founder or a CEO, it doesn't mean that you will roll up your sleeves and set up price points every day, but it's actually about surrounding your teams, with the right resources, asking the right questions in the right meetings, setting the tone for the culture, and building a profitable growth culture in the company that will actually permeate all the way through. In the book, Monetizing Innovation, every chapter we finished with questions that a CEO should ask in a meeting. That's how I see it. It starts with the founder. And I also believe, there was always this question of where does pricing sit? Who should do it? Is it marketing? Is it finance? Is it is it product? Is it like customer success? And so on. And probably Josh has a different opinion, so it's kind of good to have both of us on stage. But my opinion strongly is that pricing needs to sit, especially with these early stage companies, at the products. It has to sit with the product function, because you need to know what to productize. And how to productize is based on what customers need, what they value, and what they're willing to pay for. So in understanding pricing through the lens of willingness to pay with your customers is critical for a product person. And when you also test and learn your products, testing for willingness to pay is key, right? I walk into a lot of companies, they'll say, we are trying to achieve, like a product person will say, we are trying to see if you have a product market fit. Like probably the most used term, but the most misunderstood term, I think, is product market fit to some extent, right? You say product market fit. Like, for instance, if someone comes and asks me, do you like this microphone? I'm like, yeah, I like it. Do you like it for $1,000? The whole conversation is different. So if you didn't put pricing as part of your product market fit validation, you're simply hearing what you want to hear. So as a product person, you need to be able to achieve a product market pricing fit, not just a product market fit, right? So I think thinking about it from the product side, thinking about it from the founder side, I think is key. You will reach a stage where you probably need to have a dedicated pricing function, but that's probably much later in the journey.
Yeah, and maybe I'll share a cautionary tale from about 10 years ago so I can talk about it a little bit more publicly. But we worked on a project for a company called Evernote, which a lot of people might have fond memories of, taking notes in college, things like that. Fundamentally, a really cool business, a really cool product, 250 million registered users, amazing usage stats, 20 million active users on a daily basis at the height of the company. But fundamentally, we were brought in to tackle Project Gnome, It was Project Gnome because it's an allusion to a classic South Park episode of step 1, collect underpants. Step 2, question mark. Step 3, profit. There was at least enough self-awareness in the business and some of the folks who had come in that they had maybe gone off course a little bit with that strategy. And they had collected tons of users, but hadn't really figured out a monetization model. And to Madhavan's point about embedding kind of pricing logic in the product, the key product that was impossible to overcome was they had given away 95% of the value in the free product. Yes, they had some paying customers who converted, but ultimately, at some point in their journey, they missed the milestone marker where the product had to shift, and you had to start pulling features into a paid product and convincing people to cross that chasm. So you have to start thinking about it early, even if things look successful, even if you have tremendous success with customer acquisition. If you haven't figured out a monetization model, it can lead you down a very dangerous path.
Can I just add to this, because I think there's a interesting statistic that I wanted to sort of double down on what Josh said. So 90% of the companies that claim to have a land and expand strategy are only landing. They're not expanding. It's the known problem, right? But then if you think about it, why does that actually happen? So the thing with most tech products, at least I've seen this over and over again as a pattern, 20% of what you build drives 80% of the willingness to pay. It's an extreme Pareto rule. 20% of what you build drives 80% of the willingness to pay. But the irony in tech is that 20% is often the easiest thing to build. So if you're kind of sloppy about your pricing, sort of push it out and things like that, and you don't know, you're just building a product, just hoping to monetize and just gave it away for free. Think about what you did. You built the 20% that was easy to build, that drove 80% willingness to pay, put it out in the market and called it an MVP, minimum viable product, gave it away for free, and then you're chasing tails for like building 80% of stuff that's only driving 20% willingness to pay. You've already lost the battle. So when you think about MVP as a product person, I think you should think about it as the most valuable product, not the minimum viable product. So something to keep in mind. Or maybe even the most lovable product that you can actually build, or the minimum lovable product that you can build that people will actually pay for.
Awesome. Okay. You said a ton of things that I could dig into, but maybe one thought I have is we have a lot of people here who came to an AI pricing panel. So they're probably people who really care about pricing and making their business successful from a commercial standpoint. So let's say that they're at a company and maybe the company hasn't properly prioritized pricing early in the product journey. How have you seen folks like this be able to kind of break through to the product team and have a pointed conversation so that they can actually help the product team kind of reorient their attention?
Yeah. You want me to go? Yeah, I can go.
Yeah, I mean, I have one answer, which is there is external pressure. I think one way you can increase the external pressure is talk about how you're going to reflect your business model in your latest fundraising round. What is the material going to look like? What is the story going to be of how you will monetize in the future? Even if it's not getting into the weeds of we have to migrate customers right now and thinking about all the details and things like that, at least starting the conversation at a strategic level, what's the vision for the company, and get executive alignment around that vision. I think it's a good place to start.
Yeah, I think in definitely getting that alignment, I think is key. But also trying to understand what problem areas you will focus on, right? I mean, there is what you build, there is the how you will charge, and then the how you will bundle and package things. I think at least having a discipline around the right topic areas. So I think if you are in an AI company and you're probably giving product rapidly away, stopping that and saying, okay, what is the expansion motion? Like where does land stop? What's the expansion? Is there willingness to pay? But the next immediate question you need to start asking is, how are we charging for this? Because how you charge is way more important than how much you charge. And we have seen this over and over again. So like having that conversation, and then the other conversation is, okay, well, how do you bring your offer structure to the market? Like what kind of packaging strategies would you have? Are you a platform, and then are you doing add-ons? Are you, good, better, best? Should you Now with AI, you can actually do packaging by use case. Should you be a use case one? Because I sincerely think that verticalized software is actually going to be really, really powerful, especially given AI. And if you can replicate that same thing in another vertical, often the willingness to pay is different across verticals. And if you have even similar software, you can actually start making versions of your product based on what customers truly need and are willing to pay for that vertical. So thinking about all of these aspects become critical, and not just having a blanket conversation of what are we doing on the product side, but push yourself to think about product, pricing model, and packaging also.
Awesome. Okay. So I think we're all here to hear about AI, and in particular how you think AI is going to change pricing and packaging. So maybe what have you seen over the past 3 to 5 years that's changed already?
Yeah.
And then if you were to put on your Nostradamus hat, where do you think it's going next 5 to 10?
Sure. Well, I think it's pretty clear where we've been is we're already living through the final days of user-based pricing. If it wasn't clear already, Madhavan called it a while ago. He said user-based pricing is going to be dead within 5 years, and that might have even been too generous. As you saw at Dreamforce a couple weeks ago, even Mark Benioff was out saying, essentially, user-based pricing is dead. We tried this Copilot thing with Einstein, invested a lot of money, people got a lot of value, but we think the new monetization model going forward for all of Agentforce is going to be usage-based pricing and even outcome-based pricing. And I think that is, if I pivot to kind of the future, people are thinking about usage and consumption, and that might work for kind of infrastructure products. But for a lot of the vertical software that Madhavan is talking about and others that are built on AI, it's really outcomes-based that is going to be the differentiator. And that comes from two factors. One, the psychological factor. So I worked with a customer success software company that explored all kinds of different metrics as they thought about the move away from user-based to usage. And fundamentally, even for the same amount of dollars, if something was expressed as a resolution as opposed to a conversation in a customer success mode, that was seen as a win by customers, that they were willing to pay more even for the same results, just because it was clearly tied to outcomes that they were responsible for. The buyers were responsible for creating resolutions, deflections, things along those lines into a call center setting. So conversations or some API call-driven metric just didn't resonate. It wasn't the language they were speaking when they had to go justify the budget. So that is the first piece. Maybe you can hit on some other pieces too.
No, I think those are the two key trends that we are seeing. One, I mean, the whole movement to usage and outcome, and also verticalized software. But I think probably more useful to double down on that, talk about how to think about pricing models, what's the framework. That's also evolving in AI, and I think we're seeing some really good but simple frameworks that we have sort of come up with in our past that can actually be really used by AI companies when they especially think about the how you charge question. So typically in AI, what we are seeing is there are two types of workflows. I mean, this is probably obvious to many of you, but one is, is it completely automating something, as in replacing humans, or is it augmenting stuff and making someone a bit of a superhuman, as in saves efficiency and so on. So that's one dimension that you have to think about your product. Are you in automation mode or augmentation mode? And the other one is the attribution for value very clear based on your product? True value, ROI, is the attribution clear? Because when you talk about outcome-based pricing, the biggest challenge always has been, can I truly attribute the success to you or your product? Okay, my conversion went up, but could it have gone up in some other ways? Is it just the product? What happened? So I think when you have outcome-based, you have to have good attribution that you drove those outcomes, as in your product. So if you take a 2x2, and consultants used to love 2x2, so I was one, at least not anymore. But if you take a 2x2 and say, okay, for the people, if you're in the augmenting mode and you are, let's say, attribution is high, then you should probably go for like an outcome-based model, or at least try that, because the attribution is high and you're also augmenting, so at least some version of outcome-based metrics should be there. If it is augmenting and then there is attribution is less, you should at least go for a hybrid model. So where you might still have seats because you're not replacing seats, but the hybrid model actually protects you by having two dimensions. There's a user and a usage component. So then you actually go a bit more at least to usage, and if not all the way to outcomes, at least usage and user metrics. If you're in the, let's say, automation mode and your outcome is clear, then of course, attribution is clear, you have to be in outcome. If you're in automation mode and let's say the outcome is you can't attribute it very clearly, you should definitely be in usage based, because you should not be in the seat based model at all, right? So either way, pure user based or seat based license, I said this a year ago that it'll be dead. I think I said in the next 5 years, year and a half ago. I think it's already kind of dead. So it was faster. I think the only thing I didn't call was how fast it'll happen. But think about at least a hybrid model. I think that as a immediate step to get onto, and then work towards getting pure usage or outcome based. I think that's how I would think about it.
Awesome. Okay, so I would love to talk about this idea of transitioning. So like I'm a company, let's say I'm on a seat-based model today, and I want to execute a transition to either a hybrid or maybe a pure outcome-based or usage-based model. Talk to me about some of the things that might be unintuitively hard about that. There's some obvious things that are hard, but like if I'm a CEO and I'm thinking about making that transition, what are the like 1, 2, 3 things I should be like really top of mind before I make that decision?
Yeah, so having done with this with a few companies that are incumbents embracing AI for the first time, part of the challenge is that the old measure of value seats might have no correlation with the new measure of value usage. And I'll tell you why that is the case is in the customer success space, for example, we work with one company where the more agents, the more seats you had, it didn't necessarily tie to usage because those were often very short interactions with a large number of customers, and it just didn't translate. There was too much overlap with what type of segment of customers are we serving in the end market. So that points you in the direction of having some hybrid type model as part of the equation there. That fundamentally, I think this is also a point that if you start down the wrong path, you kind of accumulate pricing debt, I'll call it. It's not technical debt, it's pricing debt. Migration of any type is really challenging. It's always easier to get it right the first time with a brand new cohort of customers.
Yeah, maybe one counterintuitive thing that, probably I can share is, even though your right model might be usage-based models, for instance, your customers might actually push you for like, I want certainty and I want like a predictable bill and stuff like that, right? So you can set all the pricing model and pricing in B2B, but it's a human having a human conversation. So like the counterintuitive part here is to also enable and train your sales force on how to defend these pricing models. Otherwise, it's just you did a lot of work to get to the right model, but you actually had the wrong sales motion selling that, and you just caved in the moment someone asked. If I'm a customer and I'm sort of negotiating with someone, of course I'll ask for predictability because that's what I'm supposed to ask. But in negotiations, there are some simple ways to even deflect these kind of things. I was coaching a startup that is, in a very early stage, and they were like, oh, every time we go there with usage-based models, they're saying we need certainty and just give us like one number. And I asked them to ask a simple question to their people who they're dealing with. So how do you pay for your AWS bills? It's like, oh, okay. So you do actually buy software and or infrastructure on a usage basis. How did you account for that? So like turn the conversation back on them. And it's like, oh, okay. Then even if you actually concede on something like a fixed, say that, okay, for the first 6 months or some POC, or some time period, let's agree on this fixed, and I'm going to give you unlimited usage, so go nuts. But this is the usage-based pricing that we will actually revisit after 6 months. That actually gives you a seat back at the table. And if you, or even if the usage is up to a certain limit, let's say, and then when you renegotiate, if they've crossed that limit, then you can actually, if you already published pricing, it's an automatic conversation. And you can start budgeting again, because after 6 months of usage, you can have a forecasting model for the next year and so on, right? So there are ways to actually make sure that you get the outcome in the negotiations. If you're sloppy, then you will just concede to like some number. In theory, you might have usage-based pricing, but in practice, you might be just coming up with, I think the customer's budget is 200K, so that's the answer, right? I mean, so avoid that temptation. Actually put rigor on what the usage-based, pricing model should be and what you can actually get out of these deals, and that'll be highly profitable in the mid to long run.
Awesome. I cannot agree more. I think, if you just study how AWS works, how Snowflake works, like there are companies that have solved these problems at much greater scale than you.
Yeah.
And I think just liberally stealing from them is like the best way to approach a lot of this stuff.
Or at least call that in the negotiation, because someone has called the bluff, right? I mean, and it's easier there.
Definitely. Okay. I am curious. One of the things that I spend a lot of time thinking about is AI as like, let's say I'm a company and I have some kind of flavor of Gen AI embedded in my product. In an interesting sense, because the models are changing at such a rapid rate of speed, the value that I'm providing to my customers is changing as well. How do you think about pricing and packaging when the kind of underlying value of your product is so volatile, mostly to the upside? But I'm just really curious, like, how do you advise companies to kind of handle that inherent volatility?
Yeah, maybe I'll talk to the upside and you can talk to the volatility. So to give you an example of upside, a rule of thumb for most software negotiations historically, cloud products, was you need to create a 5 to 10x ROI for your customers in order to overcome those sales hurdles. And I think in hindsight, that was partially because the value proposition was fuzzy, that attribution was quite difficult with a lot of those technologies. I'm talking to some earlier stage AI startups who've been able to get 100% recovery on cost savings. And they've been able to do that by not just documenting how much, in one case, is very highly regulated healthcare settings, replacing business process outsourcing spend lines. They were able to replace dollar for dollar, kind of licensing for how much cost they had taken out, partially because in addition to kind of that cost takeout, there were other benefits like error reduction. But that type of total shift in the paradigm of negotiation strategy and what to aim for and what your high water mark should look like is something that I don't think would be possible without the type of attribution that we can see with some of the products coming on the market.
Yeah, and I think from my side, I think if the models are changing and inherently your, sort of your value is increasing, I mean, it's a good problem to have. It just makes sense that you should revisit your pricing more often and just have the courage to actually do that. Of course, if you're changing your pricing every day, that's going to be problematic. But back in the day, we used to say revisit your pricing at least every 18 months. That was what we said for an average software company pre-AI in terms of packaging and pricing. Nowadays, I say every 6 months you need to look at it. Things are changing fast. So I think that's how I would see it and reset it. Even if that means for newer customers, the price is adjusted. But for your existing customers, you can have some migration strategy that can actually bring them back to the new pricing over a period of time. So
wow. I actually want to double click on. So did I hear what you said right? Basically, like there's startups in the AI space. It's like if I can provably save you $1,000, I will charge you $1,000 for that.
Correct.
Yes.
In which the old logic that we used to tell people in negotiations was realistically you could get $100 or $200 of that value we created. You have to create this kind of ROI hurdle to overcome. But I think in hindsight, that was just us reacting to the fuzziness of attribution.
So can I double down on? I have a slightly modified example that even goes beyond this. So like one of the startups that I was advising, they basically are again in automation kind of space, and replacing human workflows, right? So the immediate cost savings that they were looking at was like, okay, let's say if I'm replacing a salesperson, I'm just saying, right, for just sake of example, then what is the salesperson actually paid? And that's the cost I'm saving. So like, recouping cost is that. What we were able to do there was actually go beyond that, because what we were able to show was that there was at least a 6 months onboarding for someone to actually, even be impactful. So it was not just the 100% of cost recovery, it's on top of that 6 months. And because with AI, you can be instantaneous. So that also, so it goes beyond just the cost savings to the opportunity cost, and then it gets fascinating.
I mean, what I'm hearing, and I think this is exactly what you said earlier, but basically you're starting from a really deep personalized understanding of what is the value that you're providing. And especially in this more usage and AI-based world, essentially because you're letting machines do the value counting on your behalf, you can basically say, cool, we both agree that we saved you this amount of money. You can see it here. It's provably true. And I'm going to charge you all of that for you, or even more in some cases. And so what you're actually able to do is get to a much, much richer understanding of the true value of something, and then have it be attributable through a machine interface, and then you can kind of reap a huge amount of reward. That's really cool.
Correct.
Exactly. That's exactly right. I mean, understanding where the true value is, having processes to measure that very quickly, and then once you measure it, be able to charge on it because the attribution is clear. This is, I think, what you're able to do with AI. I mean, and getting innovative on your pricing models is going to be the first big win. So for instance, can I hire a AI sales agent? That's a whole different model than pricing based on seats or cost recovery, things like that. So.
Awesome. So it sounds like outcome-based pricing is a big thing happening in AI. What are other things that people in the audience should be thinking about in the next maybe year as they're thinking about revisiting their pricing? Let's say they have an existing business model and they're starting to add AI features. What would you advise they do tomorrow to kind of set themselves up for the new era of faster agility?
The cycles are shrinking, as Madhavan pointed out, for how often you revisit pricing. It means that the methods used to optimize pricing have to change as well. The days of taking 3 to 6 months to do a full-fledged kind of market validation study might be gone, because the pace of technology and competitive landscape is changing much quicker than it used to. And that's just part of digging into these repeatedly shorter and shorter development cycles for software, with AI coding itself and things like that now as well. So it means you need to be more nimble. You need to get to the 80-20 logic quicker. You need to have conversations with a handful of customers and make decisions. You need to have an advisory board that you can lean on. It doesn't mean that you need to do all the heavy lifting of pricing that you had to do 10 or 20 years ago is the gold standard. I mean, this is coming from people who literally help create demand for the concepts of things like conjoint analysis. But I truly believe the world has moved on.
Yeah, maybe I'll answer this question differently. So in terms of what you shouldn't do on Monday morning, right? The temptation that I see many companies do, especially if it's, let's say, an existing product, you just added AI, I mean, you're an incumbent. So add the AI and have the same price, for instance, right? I mean, just don't do that, because I think then you're giving a lot more value at the same price, and you didn't even train your customers to understand that you're actually giving more value. Take an example from or cue from company like ServiceNow, for instance, right? I mean, they have an AI-based package and a non-AI based package, and I believe the AI package is 60% premium compared to the non-AI package. That's probably a smarter way to actually think about it on Monday morning, as opposed to putting everything in else and saying, okay, there's a lot of competition and there's a price war, and let's just keep the same price. So, I mean, price wars every single time the others started it. So.
Awesome. Okay, we have about 5 minutes. I want, Madhavan, I heard you might be writing a new book, so would love to hear, what are you focused on, and what's the kind of core thesis of the book?
Sure. So we wrote Monetizing Innovation 8 years ago. It is probably way more relevant today than it was even 8 years ago. Because of AI, you have to think about pricing early. So we gave a blueprint of how to build a great product. A great product is built around what customers need, what they value, and what they're willing to pay for. But the journey does not stop there. So that's where the next book comes in. So it's called Scaling Innovation, and it'll be out in April, so watch for that. And the thesis of that book is, in monetizing innovation, we told you how to build a great product. In scaling innovation, we tell you how to build a great business. And the subtitle of the book is Architecting for Profitable Growth. And how do you get profitable growth? You need to get both market share as well as wallet share, right? And if you want market share and wallet share, you need to truly understand, after building the product, how do I get people, how do I make money, and how do I keep them? Acquisition, monetization, and retention. Fancy words. But there are conflicts with these things. Like if I, for instance, charge a lot, I will monetize, but I might not retain. If I give away the product for free or low price, I might acquire, but I'm not monetizing. So how do you break through these tensions to actually get to both market share and wallet share, build for profitable growth? So we are writing about that, strategies that you can do in your, let's say, early startup phase, the 0 to 20 million ARR, and then what do you do in your kind of growth phase. So that's the book. I'm excited about it. So 80% done. If I get time back, I'm going to go write another chapter. So I'm just kidding.
Very cool. I'm very excited. I have to say that the first book I read when I started Metronome was Monetizing Innovation. So I really look forward to it.
Thank you.
So I want to open it up to folks on the ground.
When you asked about the increasing in innovation in the AI field and how it creates more value, the interesting thing is that the technology that powers many companies. So there's a competitive dynamic and a points of parity, because my product improves, another person's product improves as well. So it was surprising to me that the price would change. It's almost to me like the price to keep the customer versus going to a different company by increasing the value, but by maintaining the same price. I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
I think maybe this gets into also like the different ways that AI will permeate our lives. That there will be kind of consumer applications from the LLM providers that serve as assistants that can be highly personalized, but whose workflows will be somewhat generic, whose data pattern matching is also somewhat generic, as opposed to a lot of the B2B products that are really focused on the secret sauce of proprietary training data and more industry-specific workflows. So it feeds a little bit into this idea that Madhavan was getting at, that when he says vertical software is the future, to tie the two thoughts together, it almost has to be, because the generic horizontal application of I just need an agent that makes me look smarter and helps me do my job better will probably be solved by consumer applications that are, if not free, I'm assuming very low price. So the software vendors who want to build really sustainable, monetizable solutions are going to have to find that secret sauce that in our thinking comes from kind of the vertical specific nature of data and workflows.
And just exactly, I think the vertical software, I think just something to definitely keep in mind, because often the same software you could probably productize to different verticals, and your moat would be what that vertical needs and what they're willing to pay for, as opposed to just AI enable some workflow, right? So I think the more you get into that, I think then it's actually going to be, you have more pricing power.
The outcomes-based pricing is very interesting to me, and it's the first time I've ever even heard of that. So can you help me understand a little bit, like maybe using a current example? Because I'm using a lot of these AI tools, and a lot of the outcomes aren't that great. And I'm like, I would love outcomes-based pricing for me. And then like thinking, how would I integrate that into what we're doing? Because I'm thinking of all kinds of opportunities just based on what it is. But I'd love to hear a little bit more about that from somebody who's never heard it before.
Yeah, so maybe I'll tackle the first part of that and then hand it over. First of all, you're not alone. There are plenty of people focused on pricing, who are worried about pricing, thinking about pricing. We used to hold large events at our old firm that we thought kind of resembled group therapy sessions, because the pricing can be a very lonely occupation in a lot of these companies. But I think your question was also about the fact that it sometimes attribution can still be difficult for some of these tools. And I think a lot of the incumbent players who developed co-pilot solutions are struggling with that. And I do think the easier attribution is going to be coming from autonomous agents, essentially. That's a closer link to being able to talk about cost reductions, revenue improvements. I think you're going to have a lot of fuzzy data when it comes to copilots around attribution, unless you can do some type of A/B testing, which I don't think is realistic. That people become more efficient, they produce more revenue, et cetera. I think most of the attribution we're talking about is going to be happening at the autonomous agent level.
Maybe just to explain that resolutions, the way it works, since you said example of outcome. So the way Intercom charges for this is if an AI agent actually resolved the ticket without human intervention, that's when they monetize. If a human was actually needed and then the ticket was essentially resolved, then there is no monetization for it. So that is kind of purely more outcome based, because then if your stuff is actually working the way it's supposed to, then you will monetize.
I think if you talk about what types of roles AI is going to disrupt, I think it's not just unleashing a stream of AI agents to handle all your business tasks. I think the roles that will be impacted first are the ones that can be stratified into things like, in support, you have first level support, second level support, third level support. You can dedicate agents to first level support, and as the technology gets better and better and better, you can start to say, okay, maybe there are other ones newer generations that'll handle second level support and then third level support. The sales process is an interesting one. We've danced around that a lot, but I think that's an interesting one too, because if you think about both sales processes, they are funnel-based activities where you have BDRs and MDRs and folks who take those first level interactions before kicking it to somebody with more experience, et cetera. Those types of environments where you have that kind of funnel-based activity are, I think, the ones that are going to be affected first, and where you can see real attribution to kind of changing the business processes. I think it'll be more difficult when there's kind of one single person who is responsible for accounting or finance or legal or something like that in an organization, and you can't replace them, and you can't stratify the work they're doing necessarily. You can just make them more efficient. So there will be some copilot out there, but I don't think it's going to be as pervasive as those activities that can be stratified.
I mean, you said you're having debates on whether it's user and usage, etc. I think you should try to end that debate and say it has to be user and usage and hybrid model. I don't believe a user-based model will be sustainable at all, regardless of whatever, not even knowing what you're doing. I think it's not going to be sustainable. So as well try to think about, a hybrid model. And even when you talk about usage, there are explicit ways of charging and implicit ways of charging. Explicit would be you will start metering on usage, have let's say a product like Metronome, which actually tracks all of that. Shameless plug for you, probably. And you can meter it and you can charge on it. Or implicit could be you can actually bring it into the packaging itself and say, okay, the packaging includes a certain amount of usage, and that becomes an implicit way of actually bringing usage into a user-based pricing. So for sure, don't have the debate, actually do it. That would be my thing. And also, if you're in a B2B situation, offering choice to your customers during negotiations is a great thing, because then you can actually have people self-select themselves into something. And if they self-select, the retention is actually much higher. So what happens is, if you think about outcome-based pricing, for instance, you cannot convince 100% of your customers to actually accept outcome. That's just going to be hard, especially if it is not obvious, like the resolutions. Typically, even if 10 or 20, like you probably see 80% of your customers still want some kind of other models like usage or hybrid, but 20% might actually be willing to put money on the line and say it's completely outcome. You win, I win. But if you actually go show the outcome model to everyone, it won't fit for the 80%. If you didn't show it for the 20%, you're actually you're leaving money on the table, because you might have cashed in completely based on outcome. You might have increased the conversion, for instance, by, few percentage points. And if you take, a 10% of whatever you bring to the table, that might actually be a big number. And you should be able to take a 10% rake of any kind of economic value that you actually generate, right? So offering choice is a good thing. And often a choice actually steers the discussion in such a way that when people reject something, let's say if they don't like outcome and they take the hybrid, you've already given them something to reject. So they're not going to hate your hybrid model. So like let them hate the outcome model, they'll pick the hybrid model. And you can also play around with optics to actually make sure that you appear super attractive on the outcome and increase your pricing based on, let's say, your hybrid, and you have like better leverage on the negotiation, because if the other person is pushing you on price, you can say, yeah, I'm putting everything on the line on outcome, you can go for that model. Then the discussion revolves around why outcome might be okay or not, but you have deflected the entire conversation from someone being price sensitive to actually talking about value delivery and value consciousness, right? I mean, so when you think about also what models to use, giving a choice and using that in negotiations become key. I'm writing about this again in Scaling Innovation, probably come out in April, but there's some tricks there. And it's so common. I mean, like when you look at people say, oh, is that complex? I'm like, okay, when was the last time you went to a pizza store? By a slice, the price is different. By a pie, it's different. There are two pricing models. It's actually in front of your eyes, right? I mean, but you didn't probably think about that way. So if you can simplify the conversation, choice is extremely powerful to actually put in front of people. And when they self-select, they will stay longer. So you'll build a profitable growth business inevitably.
So I just had one more thing to say about the outcome-based pricing. I think one thing you said, which I just want to amplify, is that I actually think outcome-based pricing is going to start in more B2B direct sales contexts, because you can have a much more nuanced conversation about here's the outcome, here's how we're going to measure it. Those are higher ticket prices, so you can kind of build more falsifiability into the measurement problem in a way that like a self-serve, like ticketing software is going to have a lot more harder time to do, because it's about building trust that the outcome is mapped to actual value. And then the other thing I would just say is, over time, what I've seen, and I know you guys have seen it, is that a business model is weird and exotic, and then it becomes the norm. And so what I suspect will happen is that as more and more companies adopt outcome-based pricing, it will kind of change the game theoretics for more companies to go be outcome-based. As an example, like, everyone in this company, anyone who works in Silicon Valley, your number 2 line item behind headcount is AWS spend. And so you are all implicitly buying in a usage-based way. And so it's kind of like that ice breaking of the conceptual model for outcomes. I think it's going to be slow for the next 6-12 months, and then it's going to come in a rush.
Have you seen any pressure on margins at all? It's harder to prove value as well. In your consulting experience, have you seen any pressure on software margins? Because it used to be a big thing, right? Like 80% off the bat.
So the latest data I've seen, cost of development is actually going down. And development cycles are shorter because coding tools are getting much, much better. But you were right. Cost of acquisition has been trending up. I've seen kind of longitudinal studies look at the last 5 years. The cost to acquire a dollar of software is actually higher than it was 5 years ago. But I think that's partially because we're also in a consolidation cycle, that people bought a lot of SaaS tools and are looking for ways to create efficiencies. So they're a little bit less in the mode of let's add more to our IT landscape. Most technology buyers. We were at a panel the other day with a couple of Fortune 500 technology buyers. It was really fascinating. It was put on by a VC, and they were just like, yeah, we're of the mindset that we should be consolidating our SaaS landscape at the moment. And they're almost like they're in like a hunch position, like they know AI tools are coming and they want to free up budget for that, but first they have to consolidate a lot of the last generation of software that they have on their balance sheet.
Do we think that an outcome is a binary, it's all or nothing, or do we see customer receptivity to like a degree of the outcome? You got us X% of the way there, therefore Y% spend is reasonable.
So I think I'll contrast this audience to like, let's say a similar-ish panel that we did last year and the year before. The number of people actually interested in outcome is increasing by the day, which actually is a self-fulfilling prophecy of what Scott was saying. In 6 to 12 months, it is coming. So as well spend the time. I mean, this itself is proof for me. It's not just an interesting topic, but it's like can I actually do that? A lot of people are thinking about it. And don't treat outcome as like a binary, because that actually puts you in a very defensive posture for attribution. Because if it is yes, no, most life is sometimes maybe. And then if you're pricing based on a yes, no decision, you're going to be fighting why it is a yes and someone would say it's a no, right? I mean, so in general, having shades of like attribution is going to be beneficial. Let's say if you're increasing, revenue, if it's a, let's say X% increase in revenue, I take a portion of that. If it's more, I take a portion of that. Then I think you can also be more attractive around that and be more aggressive when the revenue increase is higher. So you can actually have like play around with price structures. We didn't even talk about that. I mean, like how do you take metrics and structure it? Because let's say I take, I'll just make an example. For the first 1 million that I'm actually generating for you, I take in 10%. After that, I'm going to take 15% of any revenue that's generated up to like, let's say 5 million. If it goes beyond 5 million, I'm going to take 20%. So the conversation is like, okay, if you don't believe it, if it's not even going to generate 1 million, fine, it's 10%. But but I'll partake much more in a higher value creation mode. So a price structure it's not just a linear thing that actually scales with something. You can actually step it up in some ways that actually is also beneficial for you. So I think thinking about it in tranches or different attributions will actually make the conversation of attribution easier, because worst case you'll be pulled down one tranche. You won't be like you're not going to get paid, right? So.
Yeah, I can give a specific example of a company that used this non-binary approach and saying it's about degrees of improvement. Was a company that did revenue cycle management software, which is a fancy way of saying collections. So there used to be, a very unpopular job, which is collection agent, which is somebody who would chase chase you for invoices and bills unpaid. And that's something that can obviously be automated. So the outreach to folks wasn't just about replacing labor; it's about getting to better outcomes. And they said that the real outcome for their end customer is days outstanding. It's how many days outstanding are our invoices, and they took them from 60 to 45 or something along those lines. It created a 25% improvement in just days outstanding of their receivables. So it wasn't that they solved the problem, but it also means they weren't charging on a consumption basis. They weren't charging on an activity basis. It wasn't how many calls are placed, how many bills do I touch. It was the outcome that they were looking for. That business metric of days outstanding is what they pegged their monetization to.
Actually, I invested in a company that's very similar to this, and they chose a different metric, which is the exact same problem, but it was basically recovery rate by phone call. And they ran it in an A/B test way because the company had like 20 years of data on like, if I outsource this to this country, then the recovery rate is 17%, and this AI agent's up at 32%, and they just charged on the spread. And so I think like that's the kind of thing that I think it just shows that literally the same problem can have a slightly different metric. And I'm certain those two businesses have actually very different trajectories in the limit, but it's it's kind of showing kind of how this part of the world is changing in real time.
I'd probably say for all of this, I think at the end of the day, you need to have the courage and conviction to do the right thing. I mean, I'll take an example story that I wrote in Monetizing Innovation. I just find it fascinating. In the 90s, Michelin tires, they actually came up with a groundbreaking tire, supposed to last, 20% longer. And these were for tires for like moving, goods from point A to point B. And it was for truckers. Now, if they actually, and tires are a price sensitive market. So if you actually charge 20% more, maybe they wouldn't have gotten it, right? What they actually did was they said, if they don't price 20% premium, the tires might last 20% and they'll cannibalize their existing business too. So great innovation. They decided to charge based on a per kilometer or per mile basis back in the 90s, right? Truckers loved it because, it's not only pay as you go, but they could even start invoicing to the end customer saying, I had 785 miles of tires cost, which gets passed on to their end customer. It was a massively successful model, which, improved their position in some way. I mean, if tires could be sold on a per kilometer or per mile basis in the 90s or whatever, I can challenge you that in your AI space and software right now, if you are hesitating, the problem is you.
I do think I'm going to plug Metronome for this, but a lot of what we do with our customers is help build billing experiences that essentially expose the unit of measure and the unit of value continuously to your end customer. So I think a lot of my advice for folks is invest in the product and proving the value, and you will be able to capture the value. Like it really is about that. And then the other thing I just wanted to say, Madhavan said something very quickly that I thought was very smart about this like tiered pricing, but charging more at the higher tiers. That's a bet on your product working. It also means that if your product is actually good, your business gets to go nonlinear. And that's an insanely positive place to be as a small startup or an AI company. And so what we see is the companies that are growing the fastest have the best products, but they also have a pricing model that allows them to capture more value at higher rates as the company gets more successful. And that's like a ridiculously positive flywheel. That's why you see extremely nonlinear growth and revenue growth inside the best AI companies.